Put this up. Hello. It's now 8 o'clock and it's time for the nighttime reading hour. And I'm also on Facebook, and this will also be posting to Patreon as well if you want to listen to it later on. And it will also be on the podcast. I just got done running up the stairs with them. Not running, but carefully bringing my tea up to the room. The boiling water that was for my tea. That good stuff. So, get that set up over here. Milk. They're waiting for people to come on. And get that sleep. Welcome to another nighttime reading hour. Welcome everybody on the YouTube and welcome everybody on the Facebook Live. We'll be streaming, don't say. So we're going to get started to give everybody a chance to get in here and get their drinks together and get comfortable. And then we're going to get started on the chapter 14 of Persuasion. And we're getting down towards the, about halfway through the book at this point. But we just, so ended all danger of Anne meeting Captain Wentworth at Kilnet Hall, or of seeing him in company with her friend. Everything was safe enough, and she smiled over the many anxious feelings she had wasted on the subject. So apparently things do seem to be going well for Anne at this point. She won't be seeing much of Captain Wentworth, but she also has affirmed that his opinion of her isn't quite as bad as she feared. So that's always a good thing, right? Her opinion hasn't changed much from how good it was when they were, I won't want to say engaged, I believe, that they were. Okay. Figuring out how to best drink my tea while I'm doing this. So I'll block you out so I won't see them. Okay, so we'll get started with chapter 14. And hello, and we're having a little bit of a connection issue with the YouTube, so occasionally it'll stop and then it'll restart again. So don't worry about that too much. But that's just giving you an idea of just that there is a bit of a connection issue. Get started. Okay. So welcome to another nighttime reading hour with me, Ashtor, your host from Kindling the Hearthfire. Welcome, welcome. And as I said before, we'll be reading chapter 14 of Jane Austen's Persuasion. And we've just left off where she has found that she won't be seeing Captain Wentworth as much as she thought or feared, changed as much as she feared. So they be better off than she thought. But she hasn't actually talked to him about it. Chapter 14. My tea up here so I can have tea while I'm doing this. It's a really good cup of tea. Though Charles and Mary had remained at Lyme much longer after Mr. and Mrs. Musgrove's going wanted, they were yet the first of the family to be at home again, and as soon as possible after their return to Uppercross, they drove over to the lodge. It left Louisa beginning to sit up, but her head, though clear, was exceedingly weak, and her nerves susceptible to the highest extreme of tenderness. And though she might be pronounced as to be altogether doing very well, it had her with them. They had been all in lodgings together. Mrs. Musgrove had got Mrs. Harville's children away as much as she could, every possible supply from wanting them to come to dinner every day, and in short, it seemed to have only been a struggle on each side as to which should be most disinterested and hospitable. Mary had her evils, but upon the whole, as was evident by her, and when they dined with the Harvilles, there had been only a maid-servant to wait, and at first Mrs. Harville had always given Mrs. Musgrove's precedence, but then she had received so very handsome an apology from her on finding out whose daughter she was, and there had been so much and changed them so often, that the balance had certainly been much in favour of Lyme. She had been taken to Charmouth too, and she had bathed, and she had gone to church, and there were a great many more people to look at in the church at Lyme than at Uppercross. And all this, joined to the sense of being so very useful, had made a very agreeable fortnight. Anne inquired after Captain Benwick. Mary's face was clouded directly. Charles be at. We asked him to come quite delighted, and for my part I thought it was all settled, when behold, on Tuesday night he made a very awkward sort of excuse. He never shot, and he had been quite misunderstood, and had promised this and had promised that, and the end of it was, I found, that he did not mean to come. I suppose he was afraid of finding it dull, but upon my word I should have thought we were lively enough at the cottage for such a heartbroken man as Captain Benwick. It was all your doing, turning to Anne. He fancied that if he went with us, he should find you close by. He fancied every one to be living in Uppercross, and when he discovered that Lady Russell lived 3 miles off, his heart failed him, and he had not the courage to continue. That is the fact, upon my honour. Mary knows it is. But Mary did not give into it very graciously, whether from not considering Captain Wentworth entitled by birth and situation to be in love with an Elliot, to be guessed. Anne's goodwill, however, inquiries. The time I was there, I declare, Anne, he never talks of you at all. No, admitted Charles, I do not know that he ever does, in a general way. But, however, it is a very clear thing that he admires you exceedingly. His head is full of some books that he is reading upon your recommendation, and he wants to talk, but it was something very fine. I overheard him telling Henrietta all about it. And then Miss Elliot was spoken of in the highest terms. Now, Mary, I declare it was so. I heard it myself, and you were in the other room. Elegance, sweetness, beauty. Oh, there was no end of Miss Elliot's charms. And I'm sure, cried Mary warmly, it was very little to his credit if he did. Miss Harville only died in June. Such a heart is very little having, is it, Lady Russell? I am sure you will agree with me. I must see Captain Benwick before I decide, said Lady Russell, smiling. And that you are very likely to do so very soon again afterwards, pay a formal visit here. He will again afterwards make his way over to Kellynch one day by himself, you may depend on it. I told him the distance and the road, and I told him of the churches, thought they would be a good excuse, and he listened with all his understanding and soul, and I am sure, from his manner, that you will have him calling here soon. So, I give you notice, Lady Russell. Any acquaintance of Anne's will always be welcome to me, was Lady Russell's kind answer. Oh, as to being Anne's acquaintance, said Mary, I think he is rather my acquaintance, for I have been seeing this last fortnight. You will not find anything very agreeable in him, I assure you, ma'am. He is one of the dullest young men that have ever lived. He has walked with me sometimes from one end of the sands to the other, without saying a word. He is not at all a well-bred young man. I am sure you will not like him. There we differ, Mary, said Anne. I think Lady Russell would like him. I think she would be so much pleased with his mind, that she would very soon see no deficiency in his man. So do I, Anne, said Charles. I am sure Lady Russell would like him. He is just Lady Russell's sort. Give him a book, and he will read all day long. Yes, that he will, exclaimed Mary tauntingly. He will sit poring over his book, and not know when a person speaks to him, or when one drops one's scissors, or anything that happens. Do you think Lady Russell would like that? Lady Russell could not help. Upon my word, said she, I should not have supposed that my opinion of any one could have admitted of such difference of conjecture, steady and matter-of-fact as I may call myself. I have really a curiosity to see this person, who can give occasion to such directly opposite notions. I wish he may be induced to call here, and when he does, Mary, you may depend upon hearing my opinion, but I am determined not to judge him beforehand. You will not like him, I will answer for it. Lady Russell began talking of something else. They spoke with animation of their meeting with, or rather missing, Mr. Elliot so extraordinarily. He is a man, said Lady Russell, whom I have no wish to see. His declining to be on cordial terms with the head of his family has left a very strong impression in his disfavor with me. The decision checked Mary's eagerness, and stopped her short in the midst of inquiries. There was a voluntary communication sufficient. His spirits improved, and he was now quite a different creature from what he had been the first week. He had not seen Louisa, and was so extremely fearful of any ill consequence to her from an interview, that he did not press for it at all, and on the contrary seemed to have a plan of going away for a week or 10 days, till her head was stronger. He had talked of going down to Plymouth, Captain Benwick to go with him, but as Charles maintained to the last, Captain Benwick seemed much more disposed to ride over to Kilmich. There can be no doubt that Lady Russell and Anne were both occasionally thinking of Captain Benwick from this time. Lady Russell could not hear the door-bell without her father's grounds, or any visit of charity in the village, without wondering whether she might see him or hear of him. Captain Benwick came not, however. He was either less disposed for it than Charles had imagined, or he was too shy, and after giving him a week's indulgence, Lady Russell determined him to be unworthy of the interest which he had been beginning to excite. The Musgroves, bringing with them Mrs. Harville's little children, to improve the noise of Uppercross, and Leslie were again in their usual quarters. Lady Russell and Anne paid their compliments to them once, when Anne could not but feel that Uppercross was already quite alive again, though neither Henrietta, nor Louisa, nor Charles Hayter, nor Captain Wentworth were there. The room presented as strong a contrast as could be wished to the last state she has seen it in. Immediately surrounding Mrs. Musgrove's were the guarding from the tyranny of the two children from the cottage, expressly arrived to amuse them. On one side was a table occupied by some chattering girls, cutting up silk and gold paper, and on the other were trestles and trays bending under the weight of bronze and cold pies, where riotous boys were holding high revel. The whole completed in spite of the noise of the others. Charles and Mary also came in, of course, during their visit, and Mr. Musgrove made a point of paying his respect to Lady Russell, and sat down close to her for 10 minutes, talking with a very raised voice, but from the clamour of the children on his knees, generally in vain. It was a fine family peace. Anne, judging from her own temperament, would have deemed such a domestic hurricane a bad restorative of the nerves, which Louisa's illness must have so greatly shaken. But Mrs. Musgrove, who got Anne near her on purpose to thank her most cordially, again and again, for all her attentions to them, concluded a short with a happy glance around the room that after she had gone through, nothing was so likely to do her good as a little quiet cheerfulness at home. Louisa was now recovering apace. Her mother could not even think of her being able to join the party at home before her brothers and sisters went to school again. The Harvilles had promised to come with her and stay at Uppercross whenever she returned. Captain Wentworth was gone, for the present, to see his brother in Shropshire. "I hope I shall remember in future," said Lady Russell, as soon as they were reseated in the carriage, "not to call at Uppercross in the Christmas holidays. Everybody has their taste in noises as well as in other matters, and sounds are quite innocuous or most distressing by their sort rather than their quantity. When Lady Russell, not long afterwards, was entering Bath on a wet afternoon, and driving through the long course of streets from the Old Bridge to Camden Place, amidst the dash of other carriages, the heavy rumble of carts and drays, the bawling of newspaper men, muffin men, and milkmen, and the ceaseless clink of pattens, she made no complaint. No, these were noises which belonged to the winter pleasures. Her spirits rose under their influence, and, like Mrs. Musgrove, she was feeling, though not saying, that after being long in the country, nothing would be so good for her as a little quiet cheerfulness. Anne did not share these feelings. She persisted in a very determined, though very silent disinclination for Bath, caught the first dim view of the extensive buildings, smoking in rain, without any wish of seeing them better, felt their progress through the streets to be however disagreeable, yet too rapid, for who would be glad to see her when she arrived, and looked back with fond regret to the bustles of Uppercross and the seclusion of Kilnich. Elizabeth's last letter had communicated a piece of news of some interest. Mr. Elliot was in Bath. He had called in Camden Place, had called a second time, a third, had been pointedly attentive, if Elizabeth and her father did not deceive themselves, had been taking much pains to seek the acquaintance, and proclaim the value of the connection, as he had formerly taken pains to shew neglect. This was very wonderful if it were true. Curiosity and perplexity about Mr. Elliot, already recanting the sentiment she had so lately expressed to Mary, of his being a man whom she had no wish to see. She had a great wish to see him. If he really sought to reconcile himself like a dutiful branch, he must be forgiven for having dismembered himself from the paternal tree. Second, refill my teacup. Moment. Alright. So far, so good. Anne was not animated to an equal pitch by the circumstance, but she felt that she would rather see Mr. Elliot again than not, which was more than she could say for many other persons in Bath. She was put down in Camden Place, and Lady Russell then drove to her own lodgings in Rivers Street. That is the end of chapter 14. And Anne is now in Bath. So I want to thank everyone for popping in and staying on for so long. And I hope everyone has a very good evening. And I hope you will, I was seeing you Thursday evening with my Trippy Thursday with For the Worlds, the next chapter for that. Same time, same place, both on YouTube, on the podcast, and on Facebook Live and on Patreon. Patreon. If anyone would like to help the podcast keep going or continue to keep this going in the near future, for only $1 a month, um, you can subscribe to the podcast on Patreon. And as this podcast is Patreon, the Patreon supported, I believe is the term. There are several other things that are going on Patreon that are only available to patrons for as little as $1 a month. And there are several other things that I'm going to be doing in the near future, such as I'm creating and once again, Patreon patrons of $1 a month can have input to the creation and the look of said Oracle deck that I am creating. But for $5 a month, if you want to be a patron for $5 a month, you'll not only get all the Oracle deck, but you will also get a discount on the Oracle deck when it eventually does become available in public. I'm not quite sure what the discount will be at this point because I'm a little further off than maybe 6 months to a year to putting that out there. But for $5 a month, you'll not only help support the podcast, but you'll also earn a discount for the Oracle deck when it eventually does come out. So please subscribe to me on the podcast, on Patreon, and on YouTube, and keep an eye out for us on Facebook as well. We have a page as well as a group. We also have a prayer list group if anyone is interested, where people will post things they would like people to bring attention to, such as in prayers or lighting a candle. And I take a look at that every once in a while, and I light a candle every week on my personal altar and keep it lit for. If you're interested in that, either send me a message on Facebook or look up Kindling the Hearthfire prayer list, and you should be able to find us. So if you're interested, take a look there, and thank you. Thursday night around 8 p.m. Oh, and the podcast, I am writing up the podcast because it is a scripted podcast. So in the next week, I'll be putting up an event where we'll actually be putting together the actual podcast for Lunasoft, which has just passed. So thank you all for popping in, and my two listeners on YouTube, hello, welcome, and I hope everyone will pop in and view this video. It's going to be on the Facebook page for the podcast, and it's also going to be on the playlists, the nighttime reading playlist on YouTube and on Patreon as well. So see you later. Hope you have a very good evening, and I hope everybody is well. See you later.